Hi, I'm Nana Gaisie, medical doctor and a child development specialist. And I'm joining you from Ghana. We're presenting to you a short presentation on attachment theory and how it relates to cultural context. So by the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that we will understand why attachment measures must be flexible enough in our research considerations when you are working across cultures, and then also how the effect of a dominant culture on the values and perceptions of its people actually affect how we classify attachment if we conducted a strange situation. These are issues that Professor Avi already mentioned earlier in his presentation. And two more objectives of this presentation. One is for us to understand how attachment relationships are formed, mostly in the African culture, and then to help us all appreciate and gain some cultural competence. So there's been a debate among researchers that hold on to the universal hypothesis and those that hold on to the culturally sensitive theory. And universalists actually suggest that attachment security patterns are consistent across all cultures. And they say that the secure type is superior and the other types, like the insecure attachment, occur in the presence of multiple risk factors in the environment. Well, researchers who hold on so hard to their perception that in cultures we shouldn't rush to judge, let me put it that way, because insecure behavior that we see may actually be a positive adaptation to specific contexts and cultural antecedents, just as secure attachment is contextually adaptive as well. However, these two researchers agree and disagree on very common issues. They both agree that sensitive care from the caregiver and the existence of a secure base for the infant are important for attachment. And indeed, they all disagree on how to measure and interpret attachment in relation to culture. Yeah, so even though there's a debate, there are so common grounds, and that is what makes this subject very interesting. So I'll make a few references to Bobby's lecture, and he stated the fact that availability of relationships is key first to forming attachment. Then the quality of the relationships will actually determine the quality of the attachment. So he did talk about sensitivity, where a caregiver is able to respond to the signals or the cues of an infant. And then he mentioned that lack of availability of attachment actually also leads to lack of attachment or distortions. However, children are thought to be resilient, and so some of the outcome turns out to be very good. I'm also going to make reference to the five core hypotheses of universal theory. And I'm glad that in, again, the previous lecture, it was mentioned in relation to Western societies. That itself makes us see that there is an issue of cultural sensitivity there, because otherwise, I don't know why every time we talk about the universal theory, they actually make it specific to Western societies. So the five core theories are the one, universality, that all infants become attached to one or more caregivers. That the attachment is based on the explorative opportunity that the child gets, and it is balanced with the proximity of the caregiver. Then The third point about normativity, the more children are secure in every population. And then the two that I'll be talking about mainly have to do with the sensitivity and competence. Sensitivity has to do with child rearing antecedents because caregivers will either tend to be sensitive based on our definition. Also, depending on where they're coming from, also depending on their cultural values, also depending on even the value they place on the child. So that is where cultural implications come in. And then from this universal theory, a child is said to be competent when the child is able to attach securely and gain some cognitive abilities and other positive outcomes like self-control and emotional regulation and all that. Further research by Keynes and Combs Morelli and Tronick, Posada et al., Rothbaum et al., all these researchers have actually done some work in minority cultures in Africa. And they found out that cultural values and goals, as well as contextual differences, actually influences attachment antecedents. The mother is sensitive based on what she has learned from her society about mothering and parenting. And it's the same with the future outcomes, the competencies that a society that you come from will judge you based on how well you fit into the society. So it's important for us to understand that when it comes to child rearing, really, cultural values and goals account for so much, and we cannot overlook it. So Ainsworth and Bowlby actually made assumptions that secure-based behaviors manifest by way of exploration, and independence learned from the exploration is the goal of attachment. No doubt. But then, across cultures, you realize that the attachment theory actually serves the purpose of autonomous societies, including the Euro-Western. And so the focus in the strange situation is on exploration that leads to self-sufficiency, self-expression, and choice. And the researchers who worked cross-culturally are on your screen. Now, other researchers have emphasized that typical African culture, for instance, does not promote that autonomy or that self-sufficiency that we look for when we conduct a strange situation. The goal of these cultures or these societies is social harmony and not exploration. And so it's hard to measure the independence of an infant in such a culture, because that is not what the culture promotes, values, or sees as the most important in child rearing. So that yes, the implication there is that infants in such cultures may end up being classified as insecurely attached because their caregivers will encourage exploration at different intensities and time frames than is expected in attachment theory. And I have a picture there of a mother carrying a baby at the back, which is how we carry our babies, which is how we keep them close to us so that we can have our hands also free to do other things. And if the child is there, you can see that the child doesn't have the opportunity to move about. But then we realized in the lecture that this in itself is promoting attachment. So let's talk a little about the African culture and its goals. So the African culture is collectivistic, like Japan, like Israel, as opposed to individualistic of the Euro-Western. And such cultures do not value or encourage the open expression. I'm talking about the African cultures. They don't encourage the open expression of emotions like in other places, because the expression of emotions may not promote the goal of social harmony. You might say something that others will not be in agreement with. And so constantly, as we interact, as we relate with ourselves, one of the things we are thinking about is, how am I coming across to people listening to me? And this is important because social harmony, when properly done, actually promotes equitable and rapid economic development. It improves peace, it brings about cohesion, and citizens tend to respect the rights and freedom of others. So for us, this should be the outcome. These are the competencies. Also, in African ethics, the notion of character is very important. How do people see me? What do they think about me? These are valuable. And there's also the notion of the common good, where you think about mutual helpfulness, interdependence, collective responsibility, cooperation, reciprocal obligations. And so also in that photo, you can see young children trying to move towards a common goal, playing a game, or some form of socialization. And this is what we're supposed to learn right from the onset. It's also interesting to learn about the history of any culture when it comes to studying attachment. And so we have a very interesting history in most of Africa and in Ghana. And the issues about the fact that we were colonialized for a while. Now, this destroyed the base upon which Africans define themselves. Now, these colonial masters end up robbing us, contributing to an impoverished state, nation, continent. Now, our social harmony, properly done, should have helped us to make gains and to recover some reparative work in there. But unfortunately, there have been African elitists and militants who took advantage of the divisions and legacies of colonialism to form more tension and conflict. There have been corruption, the African leaders, and social harmony has a disadvantage, and the disadvantage is that we tend to have a clan mentality. So we will not hold our leaders accountable because we have that mutual sort of protective feeling. When you know the leader is going wrong, we sort of deal so much in how related we are one with another. And so we end up having weak systems. The judiciary is weak, legislative instrument is weak, and all these turn around to bite us in a very hard way. And then the African traditions that are also harmful, especially to women and children. And it's interesting to say that these are traditions that are not practiced across the length and breadth of Africa, but among some ethnic minorities, really, because just a few people, ethnicities do some of these things. The majority of Africans don't do this. But of course, when we hear the stories, they're stereotyped stories. We hear one sided story, we think that it's the whole of the continent. But yes, the harmful traditions that affect women and children, it includes female genital mutilation, it includes gender discrimination, and so even this is an interesting point to consider in the extreme situation, for instance, is the infant male or female. That is critical because of all these discriminatory practices that may affect the quality of caregiving given to a child, whether male or female. So on the screen also is a picture of a castle in Ghana at a place called Cape Coast. And this was a castle where our colonial masters lived in and perpetuated their trade activities. So given the cultural and historical context and the goals of a society, it's obvious that secure attachment findings come about not because people who come from Africa, for instance, are socialized to particularly explore, but because of available caregivers who express their sensitivity their own unique way to fit culture and support the cultural goals and values. So with all the other things I've mentioned in the history, you see that there are things in the background, in the environment, that are actually risk factors for promoting good care. But then again, resilience comes in. And then the other protective factors that account for secure attachments. Because for instance, poverty is a major risk factor because you know that it distorts the ability of parents and caregivers to actually provide sensitive caregiving. And it's real because poverty comes with illness, it comes with illiteracy, and it's also intergenerational. There's violence when there's poverty. And so protective factors are very key in such an environment to take care of all these toxic elements in the environment. So you find out that a child may be insecure as a positive adaptation to the context of the culture. Social harmony. Let's talk a little about social harmony. And where the social harmony, people have interdependent self-representations. And because we're always thinking about how to behave well in a group, we learn accommodative behaviors. And these accommodative behaviors actually facilitate attachment because they tend to form close relationships with so many people. And that continuous union and contact, that kind of communal living, actually fosters or facilitates attachment. And so there's a lot to do with conformity, propriety of behavior, compliance, responsive social cues, and coordinating one's own and others' needs. So children will tend to experience themselves as connected to others and find meaning and respect to others. So good care, what might be good care in the Western culture may not necessarily be good care in the African culture as well. A cultural case. So what might be good care in the Western culture, for instance, and not be so in African culture. And so an African child may be deemed to be incompetent in relation to the Western culture. And that is what this presentation seeks to bring out. So what is good care? Universally suggests that the gold standard of good care is sensitive care that fosters a child's attachment security. And so we've already heard about the circle of security. where the adult follows the child's lead, and the child is assured of being competent, and others are available if needed. And this is the standard care against which all care in the world is compared and evaluated if the strange situation is the standard for measuring attachment. Care that directs a child's action, that anticipates their needs, and actually dampens emotional expressiveness. A sensitive care in the African culture, because that seeks to promote the goal of social harmony. And so these are the ways by which parents and teachers teach children in their contextual reality how to accommodate others. Adult directed care, actually, researchers have found that it doesn't harm close relationships that children develop. The mothers or caregivers may seem to be intrusive, but it doesn't affect attachment. And so it's interesting when you look in that photo, the mother has to go out to work. So she's carrying some kind of food in a tray, balanced on the head, carrying the baby behind. Because she has to earn a living and she has to still care for her baby because she cannot afford to put the baby in daycare or anything. And the baby doesn't have a choice, you have to go along. So to these cultures, controlling children is what good parents do. Children are loved and cared for when you direct their behavior, when you place demands on them. Now, these things teach them to be calm, to be attentive, and well behaved. And the nice part of it is that the children experience in a positive way. And they accept it as a way that their parents accept them, show them warmth and protection. And as a teacher, helping out children in the classroom, and it's all adult directed most of the time. And the kind of care that anticipates child's needs that you find in a culture that promotes social harmony is interesting because this kind of care is another way of giving sensitive care. Before the child expresses itself, based on history, based on non-verbal signals, based on situational cues, the adult goes ahead and does what the child wants to do. Yes, it may look like the child's sense of self is being blurred, but the children tend to have shared perspectives of seeing themselves through the eyes of others. And that is good care because what you want your child to value is that kind of interdependency. Then there's the care that inhibits emotional expressions. So this helps students learn to express themselves in a way that also maintains social harmony. So there's a lot of propriety, a lot of self-control, and intense emotions actually thought to be mature and socially disrupting. And so you find out that when you're engaging Africans, for instance, silence is okay. It's part of the conversation because most of us will rather walk away from a fight than actually show our muscles. And from my own experience in relating to people in other cultures, Western cultures, I realized that makes you look, in a way, incompetent because you look like you can't fight your battle. But then, after studying all these things, I became very comfortable with who I am because this has been socialized. And That is it. I can't do anything about it. And that's why at the beginning, I mentioned that as part of the learning performance objectives, I want us all to gain some cultural competence because we can't judge other people based on our culture. That would be fair. So child learning behavior is determined by what caregivers want from them. And usually it is drawn from the community models of how individuals should function. So who is a competent child? Is the one who is able to think, believe, or interact with the environment according to the goals. And it includes proper demeanor, obedience, respect for elders, remaining calm, sharing and accepting care of others, and even accepting the advances of strangers. So we are thought to be hospitable. And this is where that nature comes from. So I've had very difficult times relating with people from other cultures, other individualistic cultures. And the conversation was difficult because the people involved came across as very rude and very mean, and based on the fact that I've also been taught to respect persons who are older, especially, it was difficult for me to communicate and say, I feel that you're trampling on me. And as simple as it looks, it took me some time to sit down and look at the cultural difference and accept that, oh, so this person doesn't intend to be rude or doesn't intend to be mean to me. And I'm also not responding out of being spineless, but this is actually who we are. And it takes a little effort to understand that this is what each person is bringing to the table. So, in my personal experience, this is what makes me think that cultural considerations are very important, especially if we have to measure attainment in any group of infants. So, other considerations of good care, for instance, includes breastfeeding. So, as a policy, babies are supposed to breastfeed up to the age of 2 years. And the myriad benefits for us in this suckling age, because children will suckle when they are sleeping, they'll suckle when they're frightened. We use it to console the children, to quiet them. For instance, when they go for their scheduled immunizations and immediately they take the vaccination, they start to cry. This is what is, oh, breastfeed your baby. And the baby suckles quietly, forgets about the pain for a while before we go on to give the analgesic. So this is good care because the baby feels loved, the baby feels safe, feels comforted. And this is part of the child's experience of the caregiver as a safe haven. So feelings of security are also drawn in this way. And especially from feeding, people who feed children regularly actually become a safe haven for them. So I already showed you the picture of mothers carrying their babies in their back and all that. That physical contact or closeness facilitates continuous union. And then when they have to play with other children, they learn all the accommodative activities, the tactile exchanges. There are non-verbal ways of communicating sensitivity for mothers, their babies as well. So it is true that separation provides children an opportunity to explore, but it's also true that it lessens the social demand on them to accommodate others because all their energy, and most of it, goes into exploring. So, in conclusion, ICMH professionals must actually appreciate that different security across cultures may be as a result of the interplay between infant behaviors, and this includes exploration, expressing and physical contact. Caregiving behaviors, including holding, control, warm, sleeping, breastfeeding, and then caregiving context. So there's an interplay between all these things. The caregiving context with multiple caregiving could be independent and dependent. These cultural and environmental factors should actually be considered in the cultural work. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for giving me attention, and I hope that this adds up to what we already know. Thank you.